It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm available for a limited time only, host Madelyn.
I'm marketed towards one platform, but secretly for other platforms, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to the show. This week, it's a side quest episode, and it was my turn to pick what we're going to be chatting about, with game topics going to be the focus of this week's episode. And inspired by various lighthearted Twitter discourse, I decided that we're going to be talking about console/platform exclusivity this week.
Yeah.
We'll save the Last of Us remake conversation for when it's no longer spicy.
Yeah.
When it's the least relevant it can possibly be. That's when we'll do a side quest on that.
That's how we do it.
So what inspired this is I saw some tweets surrounding MLB The Show, which has historically been a Sony first-party. It's developed. It's still a Sony first-party game, but it's historically been a PlayStation exclusive. It's really the only baseball game too. It's going to be coming. It's not just going to be becoming a multi-platform game, but it's actually coming to Xbox Game Pass, which was sort of surprising and a big pivot for the game. And so that inspired me to think, oh, console exclusivity. What an interesting thing that we might talk about on the show.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good topic.
Thanks, I appreciate that. So I guess I'll start off with, what is console or platform exclusivity, in case that's not something you've encountered before? It's pretty much
sure, yeah. It's sure self-explanatory.
It's pretty much what it's... Well, you would think it would be, except that it never means what it means.
That's true.
So these exclusivity agreements, or console or platform or whatever, is this idea that a game is developed and then it's only available for sale for the PlayStation or for the Xbox or for the Sega Genesis, or what have you, and you can't put it anywhere else.
Yep.
And there's a lot of marketing tied around that, and there's the way that's been handled has changed a lot from generation to generation. And like I said, well, it sounds pretty straightforward of, yes, if it's only for the PlayStation, that means it's only for the PlayStation. Here in 2021, it basically doesn't ever mean that.
Yeah, I do also think there are games that will only come out on one system that aren't really doing that because of exclusivity agreements, but because it's a lot of work to develop a game for multiple consoles. So That is something that, you might think, oh, this is exclusive to the PS4, but it's not necessarily a game that is, tied to an agreement to exclusivity.
Yes, there would be very little, I feel like, that you would encounter in this day and age where something of any prestige was an exclusive. Does that make... I'm sorry, I started that sentence in a weird way.
I didn't understand what you were saying.
Yeah, I started it in a weird way, and I'm going to double back. So if something is big enough that they would have the budget to develop for multiple platforms, and it's an exclusive, that's probably on purpose. If it's a game that would have the prestige that anyone would want to market it as an exclusive, I guess is what I mean to say, that it probably is going to come out on multiple platforms, or it's going to be officially one. Obviously, in the indie market, there's real budget and time concerns.
Yeah, you may see, there's some, not necessarily high prestige, but, the reason that, or at least my understanding of the reason why Kingdom Hearts was not on Xbox for a while was because Xbox just isn't, it's not a thing in Japan.
Right.
So that might also be a factor sometimes in why something's on PlayStation, which I think you brought up in your notes.
For sure, yes. Xbox really, Microsoft really has not managed to secure a foothold in Japan, which, now many of, as true exclusivity goes the way of the dodo. A lot of what you see that it really is only on PlayStation is there because there's just not a reason to port it to anything else because it's really targeted at the East or something like that. Mm-hmm. That's one place that we see true, not even really true. I don't even know if they would be contractually tied to PlayStation in any way, but true exclusives in the sense that they really only are on one system because it's not worth the work for a market where that console just doesn't have the market share.
Yeah.
Which is actually kind of where console exclusivity has some of its roots, actually, is in market share. So I'll do my little history corner while we're here. So the place where this really, like, truly began, there was some of this happening in earlier generations, and hey, go back to our games generations side quest if you want more details on any of these time periods. But this really appeared with the Nintendo Entertainment System, the NES. Because the NES had such incredible, just incredible stranglehold on the market at the time, Nintendo was able to negotiate with third-party developers, which, like, third-party exclusives now almost really don't exist at all. Because why would they? The economics of it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, we'll talk about timed exclusives, but yeah.
For sure. But in the NES days, Nintendo basically locked down exclusives from just tons of third-party developers with what turned out to be kind of illegal non-compete clauses, where basically there was something in the hardware of the NES, the lockout chip, where you like basically couldn't develop for the system unless Nintendo gave you permission to. Your game wouldn't play. And I think people eventually hacked that. But regardless, in order to release on the system, you had to sign this very strict non-compete clause where you couldn't make games for another system. Which, you say that out loud and you're like, that doesn't sound like that should be legal. But they got away with it for a while because they had like 90% of the market. And so why would you waste your time making games for any other system anyway? You need it to be on Nintendo's platform.
Yeah.
As Sega mounted a comeback, they adopted a looser policy around this, which did eventually force Nintendo to also compromise on this incredibly draconian policy. But for a time, Nintendo had these like crazy exclusivity agreements, which I just don't think, like, even for things that are exclusive today, you would never see something like that. That would be wild. Imagine being like, you can't develop something for something else. If somebody wants them to do that, they'll buy the studio these days.
Yeah. Nintendo also by virtue of being the longest lasting console company that's major these days, I would also say Nintendo is also the like biggest sort of first party exclusive company too, just because they make their Nintendo games,
Yeah, to the point where it almost doesn't make sense to talk about it that way. Like, there's no reason to talk about Breath of the Wild as a Nintendo Switch exclusive, although obviously
but what if they put it on PC though?
Then that would be, but that would be huge if they did, right?
Yeah.
Like, what a gigantic move if they decided to do that. That would be gigantic news.
As if they would ever let people, like, purposefully touch their games,
Yeah.
Once it's on PC, you can do mods, and I don't think Nintendo...
that's never gonna happen.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean. Like, it's ludicrous to talk about Mario being a Nintendo exclusive, because it's just baked in, right? Granted, I realize that there are occasional Nintendo games that appear on mobile, right? But if we're talking about something that is in the, non-mobile game market, it's kind of silly. You just wouldn't talk about it that way. It's not how the marketing works, because it's just already baked in.
Yeah.
So Nintendo is interesting that way, in that I think more than Sony or Microsoft, they really did have that elusive killer app with the Switch, both with the Switch and the Wii, to be honest, of something that was an exclusive, but it doesn't even make sense to think about it that way because it's a Nintendo game. Of course, it's an exclusive, right?
Sure.
You've got Breath of the Wild for the Switch, and then, I don't know, something like Wii Sports, I guess, is the killer app for the Wii, right?
Yeah.
Where obviously Wii Sports is not on any other platforms. That wouldn't make any sense.
Although, like, I didn't look into this because I didn't think of it until now, but I don't know exactly what they're, like, do they own Game Freak and, like, Intelligent Systems, or do they just have, like, partnerships with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I think of Game Freak as being second party, but I don't really even know what that means as I say it out loud. So
I'll have to look into that after the show. I'm not sure. But I know those are, like, Pokemon and, like, Fire Emblem are pretty Nintendo exclusive series. But they're not developed directly by Nintendo. But I don't know exactly what the relationship is with those companies.
a quick Google informs me that Game Freak is owned by the... Oh wait, maybe that's wrong. Nintendo owns a 32% stake in the Pokemon Company.
Ah, I see. Well, that might be enough in that case.
Yeah. It's complicated, apparently. Game Freak is technically third party, I think. However, I think the fact that Nintendo partially owns the IP is probably an important factor in where those games go.
Yeah.
Anyway, continuing to walk through that history a little bit, the PS2, almost similar to the NES in that it was just this incredibly dominant console player for a lot of that generation. Also really dominated in terms of exclusive games. The Grand Theft Autos were a big deal during that time, and there are a ton. But
dang, those were exclusive to PlayStation?
Yeah, for a while.
I associate Grand Theft Auto with such an Xbox game for some reason. I don't know why.
We should talk about this when we get to what drives people to buy a console. Because this researching for this really made me think a little bit more about why am I a PlayStation household? But yeah, I know. I do feel like anything that has that kind of machismo, I kind of automatically associate with Xbox. Anything in that kind of Grand Theft Auto world, I'm like, that's an Xbox game. But it wasn't. It was a PlayStation exclusive for a while. But anyway, as we moved into Microsoft really becoming an actual player with Xbox, and then into the Xbox 360, PS3 era, publishing cross-platform became much more the norm for third-party developers. With the exception of, like we said, just a few very high-profile third-party games that occasionally are... they're not even really real exclusives anymore. We'll talk about that, right? Or, like we said, games that are really, really Japan-targeted don't always bother with Xbox.
Yeah.
So these days, though, even, moving away from talking about third-party developers, that a little bit too, but even with first-party stuff, very rarely do we have something that's truly exclusive anymore. Instead, as Emma has already been talking about, you might have that for a year or a couple of years if you're lucky. And right now I'm thinking mostly across consoles. Obviously it's a totally different game with porting things to PC and that kind of thing. So timed exclusivity now is kind of where this has moved in the PS4, Xbox One, and now PS5, Xbox Series X gen that we're
in. I always forget what's in the middle of the Xbox now. It's not one. That was last generation.
Now it's the X.
Xbox.
Or the S.
I even wrote in my notes just Xbox S because I literally could not remember what went in the middle. So that's where I am with the Xbox. But yes, this seems to be mainly Sony's favored tactic. Is the timed exclusivity, which is the idea that they have, they're not always, sometimes they are, sometimes they're not very upfront with exactly how long they have the games.
Yeah.
But it's somewhere within a year or two, like you said. But before they're allowed to come out on other systems. So you see that with like Death Stranding came out on PC about a year after it came out on PlayStation. I think the same with Detroit Become Human. Final Fantasy VII Remake is theoretically a timed exclusive, although they haven't announced anything for bringing it to PC yet. And it will probably be the same with... I think they just have an agreement for Final Fantasies, has been my impression from Final Fantasy 16 marketing.
Yeah, I mean, all of the Final Fantasies are on Steam now, so it would be surprising to me that they didn't continue to kind of push in that direction.
Oh, sure. I'm just saying it is a timed exclusive to PlayStation, and They have not made any announcement in terms of bringing it. Which seems like... I mean, I guess Intergrade was announced at a PlayStation event, so you can't exactly be like, and also it's coming to PC. But I kind of wouldn't be surprised if maybe that gets announced sometime soon around when that comes out. Although the question will be if it's the standard version or the Intergrade version or a different version. The DLC will come with it.
To me, it would feel like a weird business move to not release to just be like, the DLC comes out now. Also, the base game on PC.
Well, it seems like the DLC is kind of a way to practice development on PlayStation 5 in addition to being story stuff. So that's why I'm like, are they also going to bring it to PC or will it be later? Anyway, that's entirely speculation. But yeah, Sony has been really favoring this, like, we get this first for a year and then you can do whatever you want with it, for big games where they can't exactly purchase the company themselves, but they still want to cash in on, like, big names. Like, the ones I listed, like Final Fantasy, of course, Death Stranding, people love Kojima, Detroit Become Human, people recognize David Cage's name. You know?
Yeah. Horizon Zero Dawn, yeah.
That's a first-party game, though.
Oh, true.
That's why it's
sorry. I should have made the distinction. You're right.
So we'll talk about that later, but Horizon Zero Dawn's an interesting case for Sony, where I'm curious exactly what went into that. But since we're talking about other stuff right now, the other common tactic, and, like, this makes sense for Xbox, right? You might get Xbox exclusives that are also on PC, which, like, they're both owned by Microsoft, so, like, that kind of makes sense. Well, I mean...
It's the same money for them either way.
The operating system, yeah. It's not like Microsoft owns all PCs, but, you know what I mean.
Sorry, but more so.
Yeah. There's not another PC operating system besides Windows, though, is there?
Well, like Linux.
But you have to develop separately for Linux,
yeah, you
right?
do.
Yeah, okay. That's what I meant.
Yeah.
Not in that they own all computers, but that it runs on their operating system.
Yeah.
But you'll also get it for some PlayStation games will come out both on PlayStation and PC, which I don't know if that's a result of an agreement or if that's just how things shake out sometimes for developers, to be honest. But that is something that's become more common recently.
Well, PC is, I mean, it certainly makes sense, or makes more sense when it's coming from a first-party developer. Like, I understand, sort of anyway. I understand the idea behind, if it's your game anyway, you're making money when it gets sold. And, like, ideally you want to use it to drive consoles, but, like, you are at least making money.
I'm actually the opposite. I get it when it's third party because that's cheaper, but if you own the studio... I mean, I theoretically get it that you're making money off of it, and that's probably why they brought Horizon Zero Dawn to the PC eventually. Mm-hmm. But it's worth it to note that it's like 4 or 5 years after its release that it came to PC. I might be overstating that, but it's several
years. I think it's 3
years.
or 4, but the idea still stands.
Yeah. But, I mean, Sony leans on its exclusives as a way to sell itself.
Yeah.
That is, like, their primary tactic in this generation. which very much works for the last generation, but we'll see going forward. So that's why it was very surprising to me when they announced that Horizon was coming to PC. And they've said, like, they just thought this particular title would be a good fit on PC, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be bringing all of their first-party games to PC. But it still strikes me as, like, a very... It feels like an un-Sony move in a lot of ways from my very layman's, like, company analysis, you know?
They've done a lot of trash-talking Microsoft's models lately, and not lately, over the past several years. They've done a lot of trash-talking Game Pass, they've done a lot of trash-talking backwards compatibility and that kind of thing, and bringing games to PC and other platforms. And it will be interesting, I think, over the next couple of years to see how many of those words they eat. I feel like there's a lot of rumors in the past couple of weeks floating around about, like, finally whatever their version of Game Pass is something is percolating, despite the fact that they've made a really big deal out of how the Game Pass model just isn't their thing.
Yeah.
Or isn't profitable. You know, harsher than it being not their thing.
Yeah. I know they said harsh things about backwards compatibility, too. Which I think maybe, like, they just want to be seen as, like, on the cutting edge of games, you know, very modern and future-facing. But, yeah. Hence why maybe they're even maybe thinking about updating not very old games so that they're on the cutting edge and future-facing.
Come on now.
Speaking of our lack of timeliness. But, I mean, part of it is also just, I think the PS3 was a very weird system, and that's partially why backwards compatibility was not available on the PlayStation 4 and past the PlayStation 4 on PlayStation 5. Like, I know the PS3 is very hard to emulate, and I imagine maybe there would have been problems with developing backwards compatibility for it, which, for a system that did not do very well, I at least understand, like, the business mindset of not adding that, you know?
For sure. And that brings us a little bit to kind of this console identities thing. So there's always a lot of hype, you know, around the ends of generation or in any kind of retrospective piece about something being one of the major things that defines a console's legacy or defines its seeming success or failure is the exclusive games that are on that console. And we can talk about whether that's right or wrong. But there's a lot of discussion about that. And over this past year, as we sort of moved out of the PS4 and Xbox One generation and into this new generation, you know, the clear media, at least, winner in that space is definitely the PlayStation 4. I mean, if you look at the list of the exclusive games that came out for PlayStation over this past generation as opposed to for Xbox, you know, it's just blatantly obvious that the PlayStation had the superior games, the generation-defining games. On the other hand, it's also sort of obvious that that's not to say that's not what Microsoft is interested in, but that Microsoft is playing a different game here than Sony is. And that probably comes from the fact that while gaming is a huge piece of Sony's portfolio, money-wise, it is a much smaller piece of Microsoft's, and also they have a lot more money to throw around. So I was seeing a lot of analysis that was like, well, like, if Microsoft if they cared enough to have the best exclusive games, they could buy all the studios they wanted, like how they could buy Sony if they wanted to, and if someone would sell it to them.
I think maybe... would you have, like, a trust investigation if Microsoft bought Sony?
Okay, so that could be the problem, right? I'm not going to dive into antitrust law here.
I guess you could say there's still Nintendo, right, but it's a little...
The point being, they could buy up as many of these prestige-y third-party developers as they wanted to, probably. I mean, they could go... This is the Epic Game Store route, right? They could buy up a ton of these development studios. And look, they are doing that, right?
Yeah.
Now, they're doing that more. But if that had been their priority for the Xbox One generation, they could have done it. And while it certainly seems like they're moving more towards that for Xbox Series X and S, the defining feature for Xbox, for sure, has been their commitment to backwards compatibility and the continued development of Xbox Game Pass as this other way of defining what their console is about.
Yeah, I would say even the existence of the Series S, as opposed to just like a digital Series X in the way that PlayStation has, it's like it's there to be a Game Pass machine.
Yep.
It's not like that's its purpose. That's why they made it. I saw a lot of people like making fun of it when it was announced, and like, no, like that's their business model right there. Like, they want to sell you on Game Pass. They don't really want you buying. Well, I mean, they don't mind you buying discs, but that's not their primary focus here.
Absolutely. And, you know, again, well, it certainly seems like, I mean, there's been a lot of kind of like, ooh, everybody's celebrating this, but yikes, acquisitions by Microsoft in the past couple of years, with Bethesda, most recently, and all the time, Xbox on social media is like, our new child, Bethesda Games, like... just like constantly like, look at my boy. But also things like Obsidian and Double Fine and like all that kind of thing. And not that Sony hasn't done plenty of buying up of studios of their own, and not that there hasn't been some high profile news about how that's gone for some of those studios recently. But certainly Microsoft seems to be like well, the idea of wanting console exclusion, or exclusivity, that's a little too real, isn't it? Exclusivity is the positive way of putting it. Is definitely driving this increasing consolidation of the industry, right?
Yeah.
In a way that makes sense, right? Developing games is expensive and hard, and having a company behind you to give you the money is a good thing, probably, for you as a developer, unless you want to make Days Gone 2, in which case it's probably not a good thing for you.
Yeah, it's definitely like because it's definitely good, it's usually good for the studio, at least initially, right? Because you get, I mean, it depends on who's buying you, of course, but you get, like, backing and funding of a big company, and especially if you're an indie game, that's like, you know, you made it. You don't have to crowdfund ever again. Yeah. And Xbox, Microsoft in particular has been really chill about, like, they've bought people, like, with games, like, on the verge of release, whatever that means, like, within a couple of years or so. And they've been pretty chill so far about being, like, not being like, okay, now you can only release this on Xbox. Which I think is good, overall. Because I know they bought, like, Obsidian before...
Outer Worlds,
Before Outer Worlds, and they bought Double Fine, but Psychonauts 2 is still coming to all the platforms it was coming to before. Someday. And stuff like that, which I think is good. But as soon as those games come out, theoretically all games from them from now on will be platform exclusives. Which, like, looking at it from purely, like, I own PlayStation. I don't go on Twitter and, like, comment on Xbox tweets, like...
PlayStation Supreme!
Yeah, I'm not that into Sony, but I've never owned an Xbox. But looking at it from, like, a purely utilitarian thing, it strikes me that Xbox has the better formula here. Like, sort of, they sacrificed a generation, sort of. Yeah. But in that generation, they got this Game Pass set up, and now they're buying studios. so that they can put cool exclusive games, you know, on their Game Pass service, which, like, for people already on it, that keeps them on it, right?
Yeah.
And it also brings in new people to an ecosystem that's already set up for them. And then once they're in Game Pass, they're like, wow, there's so many games on here, you know? And that feels like a stronger strategy rather than Sony's focused on, like, getting all these exclusives, which got them a lot of attention during the PlayStation 4, but now they're sort of scrambling to set up more of an ecosystem for their customers.
Yeah, it does feel a bit, this is way oversimplified, listeners, so, like, don't jump me for this. But it does feel a little bit like Blockbuster versus Netflix right now, right? Not that Blockbuster had, like, disc exclusives, right? I recognize this is an imperfect comparison. But, like, the idea of, like, you know, are you paying us monthly a small amount? Or are you paying us, you know, chunks when you buy our $60 games?
Yeah. And, like, don't get me wrong, there's issues with Game Pass, right? That we have talked about in, like, our game preservation episode, right? Yeah. Like, going full digital is something that does scare me a little bit, personally, as someone who likes my physical media.
Yeah.
But that's not really what the focus of today's episode is.
And it's also something we're grappling with, I think, across all media culturally right now.
Yeah.
It's not something that is particularly unique. Even in the games industry, it's not something that's particularly unique to Xbox. It's just like games are moving digital. Nobody seems that interested in preserving them.
Yeah. Yeah.
I really wish I understood more of the economics behind things like Xbox Game Pass and things like Apple Arcade. I don't understand where the money goes.
I don't really either, to be honest.
I'm like, does the developer... I'm sure it's different for both of these systems is the thing, too. Like, is it like YouTube... When we talked about YouTube Red in the streaming episode, is it like that, where you get a percentage based on the amount of time people spent playing your game? Or is it like, no, you just get like a flat fee to be on Game Pass? Or is it something else? Like, I wish I understood what money the developers are making from it. Because I feel like that is something that I haven't seen a lot of information on, and I wish I knew better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I don't know how the financials work. In Apple Arcade's case, it seems like they haven't been as successful as they thought they would, at least from Apple's side, which has they've sort of shifted their direction a little bit in terms of what games they're bringing onto it, which is good. You know, in contrast to other companies, other large media conglomerates, it's nice that they're not just like, I don't want to play with you anymore. You know that meme? Like, they're not just like, got the toy and they're dropping it.
So long, Stadia.
That meme really is just a summary of, like, how Google works in general.
Yeah.
So, like, the Google Glass. Do you remember Google Glass?
I do.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
Oh, no. Apple Arcade is sort of an interesting exclusivity case, though. Another one that's like, how do you even call it exclusivity anymore?
Yeah, the technical definition of an Apple Arcade exclusive, the things that are labeled as such, means that they're not on Android, basically.
Yeah.
But they could be on console or PC or something. Which isn't to say it doesn't now have some relatively high-profile actual exclusives. I mean, Fantasian is now on there from the Final Fantasy creator. Like the last game of several notable composers and people who have worked in the video game industry. It's totally an Apple Arcade exclusive. But just because it's labeled as such does not necessarily mean the game is only available on Apple Arcade.
It's all a marketing thing.
Yeah.
So funny. I also wish I knew more of the economics behind, like, timed exclusives, too. Of, like what percent of games that are going to be sold, or what percent of revenue that's going to be generated is generated in the first year, you know?
Yeah.
Or what percent of people, you know, how many people actually own multiple consoles and, like, opt to, like, I do. I guess I do. I guess I'm talking about myself. But, like, how many people actually own multiple consoles and, like, decide, like, no, I'm gonna wait for the Xbox version?
I think people with Switches seem to do so.
That's fair, but that to me feels different. There are real pros and cons to buying. I mean, we talk about this all the time whenever a game comes out on both PlayStation 4 and Switch. There are genuine, real pros and cons to buying a game on the Switch versus buying a game on the PlayStation, having to do with the mobility of the game, but also perhaps the quality of the game or how much you think Joy-Con drift is going to impact your enjoyment of the game. That's genuinely what makes me think about it the most. I'm like, is this a game where a drifty... Look, it doesn't happen in most games. Like, it isn't a major issue except in, like, Animal Crossing and Fire Emblem, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I can never know. And so that does actually often drive my choice. I'm like, will a drift in this game drive me nuts, or will it be manageable?
I now have a trade-off on my Switch where I have the Joy-Cons with drift, but with vibration.
Yeah.
And the Joy-Cons, well, the third-party Joy-Con-like things
Happy cons.
that do not have drift, but do not have vibration either.
No rumble.
So that's very a game-to-game sort of decision to make there.
But my point being, if you're making that choice, you are choosing between genuinely different experiences. If you're choosing between playing a game on Xbox and PlayStation, Xbox and PlayStation Hive don't come for me. But there's no difference.
I understand waiting for a PC version, too.
I do, too.
Even if,
I mean,
sometimes that's annoying.
Candidly,
both Switch and PC people can be annoying. So can the other ones, but I just notice them more, I guess.
Candidly, I don't personally understand waiting for a PC version because I have never been a part of that.
Yeah.
I have never even dipped my toe into being, like, a true PC gamer.
It's just so expensive. And I know consoles are, too, but, like, getting a good PC is, like, double that. And then you have to, like, maintain it, you know?
Well, especially right now. I mean, graphics cards right now cost your kidney.
Yeah.
For a cheap one.
Yeah. And, like, this is a little off topic, but, like, I've tried to play games, like, long games on my PC. I just can't do it. I need to, like, I need to be, like, in gaming mode versus, like, you know, on my computer. Hence why, like, there's some game, like, I just bought Disco Elysium on the PS4, so that I'll actually finish it, because I simply won't do it on my PC. Because I can't. Like, it's not physically possible for me. Well,
I'm waiting for my dream Nintendo Apple low-power hardware cross-platform crossover. I know they have nothing to do with each other. I'm just like, my Mac won't play anything. Let me play the crappy Switch versions of games, please.
That's funny.
So speaking of computers, is it time to talk about the Epic Games Store?
Oh boy. I feel like we've talked about Epic a little bit before, so we don't want to get too deep into the can of worms, but...
I won't.
Yeah, let's talk about Epic.
Just the like, top layer of the worms in the can.
Yeah.
So, you know, console exclusivity is one thing. But for the most part, and look, I'll be upfront that I think all of this is dumb. I think the hate for the Epic Games Store is mostly dumb. Because I understand the desire. And that even some anger or frustration about exclusivity when it's a console. Like, yeah, I get it. For me to play a game that's exclusively on Xbox, I'd have to, like, buy an Xbox. And that's a lot of money. And that's a pain. And that would be irritating to me if there were any games I wanted to play on Xbox. I'm sure if I had an Xbox, I would be irritated about not being able to play any of the PlayStation exclusive games, right? Maybe. I don't know. Most of the games I play these days are on Game Pass. So, like, would I have spent less or more on the Yakuza series? Hard to know. like my monthly fee versus the on-sale games?
Hard to know.
Hard to know. I'll have to crunch the numbers one of these days. Anyway, but that I understand. I understand the value of exclusivity there. And any frustration you would feel about not being able to play a game because you don't want to spend like $500 and then another $60 to have the console and the game.
Yeah.
I less understand frustration around like, what launcher must I use to launch this game on my gaming PC? Yeah. I know that there are quibbles with Epic's interface.
Yeah. I will say it's annoying. I don't think they have a cart. But I mean, I also deal with that on the Switch, which I think is just... Nintendo, please put a cart on your console.
Like, there are quality of life gripes. However, I don't understand that. It's hard for me as someone who doesn't play on PC, I guess. Like, I'll put that out there. But in general, it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, you have a PC, you just have to download another app. Like, yeah. Come on.
I mean, I don't think Epic is, like, some saint of a company.
No.
Right? I think that's important to say.
I don't think that most of what they're doing with the Epic Games Store is the heart of that.
Yeah. I imagine it's probably two pretty separate teams that work on Fortnite versus the Epic Games Store, although I don't know.
You would think so. You'd think the people working on Fortnite are pretty busy.
Yeah. I mean, you know, they're already crunching. Why not work on some web interface design?
Would explain a lot, I guess, but yeah.
Yeah, and like, I don't know, it's a good thing that they take less money from developers. You know, okay?
Yeah.
They clearly have not made any impact on Steam.
Yeah.
Because if they had, Steam would have done something, but Steam is still the same mess it's always been.
Yeah.
So, clearly they're not threatening the other major launcher, you know?
Yeah.
So I don't fully understand the rage either.
Anyway, if you've paid attention to a game that's been released in the past, like, 4 years or whatever, 5 years, however long Epic Games Store has been around, you've probably been aware that games are occasionally on PC snatched up as Epic Games Store exclusives. This is, once again, a marketing ploy. Again, it is one that I understand from Epic, I guess, of like, okay, we need to get people to use our launcher. So the way you do that is that you get games that are only available on your launcher. Same idea of like, we need to get people to buy our PlayStation 3, so we're gonna have games that are only available on the PlayStation 3, right?
Yeah.
Except even more so, right? Like, theoretically, getting someone to buy the PlayStation 3 is only the first step, right? You need to get someone to continue to engage with, like you were saying, Emma, the ecosystem of ways they can give Sony their money, right? As opposed to with Epic, I mean, yeah, you do want to train people to buy games from the Epic Games Store, but nothing about the Epic Games Store, other than the fact that, like, Fortnite is there, is, like, particularly training you to give Epic your money in other ways than buying more games. It's, like, even more so beyond just, like, yeah.
I'll be honest, my Epic Games Store has Hades and a collection of random games that have been free each week.
Yeah.
Or each month. I don't remember how often they change it, but yeah, that's pretty much what I use the Epic Games Store for. How do they support the free games each time, too, is the question.
Who knows? But what Epic does, and again, I think this is, like, almost unquestionably a good thing for the developers involved, at just, like, every angle, basically, is in addition to their fees being much lower, Steam takes a 30% cut, right?
Yeah.
Epic takes, like, 15? 12?
Yeah, 12 or 15, yeah.
And also, if it's on Epic Games Store, you waive the Unreal Engine fee if you're developing on that, which is another, like, a 5% royalty, I think. So that's a lot. And I think that's a lot of money, regardless of how much your game sells. That's a significant percentage. But in addition to that, they also, in these exclusivity deals, will basically, I mean, like, the idea is basically they're prepaying for games, more or less. Is they're doing this, like, guaranteed sales minimum for whatever the exclusivity time is, and they'll pay you that regardless. And obviously for any developer, but especially for any developer below the AAA level, that's gigantic, right?
Yeah.
That's like just an incredible amount of stability to have heading into your game launch. So a lot of the details of how much money has been spent has become public because of Epic's ongoing, but like upcoming lawsuit with Apple over another whole kind of exclusivity in the Apple App Store and what's allowed to be sold there, which is so far beyond the scope of this episode of the podcast that I won't go there.
For Apple has actually, since that happened, lowered the amount that they take for smaller developers, I believe, as part of like
yeah,
COVID
that sounds
support.
Familiar. Like if you make less than a certain amount of money per year.
Because we got some emails about that.
Look at you.
So it's very interesting to see where that lawsuit will go now that, I don't think that would have affected Epic, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm sure Epic makes more money than their cutoff.
Yeah.
Anyway, interestingly, right, so in the 2020 alone, Epic spent $444 million on exclusivity deals. And the article I was reading, this is not in 2020, but in 2019, for example, they guaranteed $10.45 million for Control, as an idea of kind of like what the scope of these deals look like. And unsurprisingly, right, this is like a loss leader kind of strategy. Epic is aggressively trying to build market share right now, and so they're apparently set to lose like at least $300 million over these past 2 years because these games aren't, they're not making that much in sales, right? Which is aggressive, right? It really gives you a sense of like how much money Fortnite is making.
Yeah.
And again, it feels very similar to like how Microsoft could play this if they wanted to, right? If Microsoft wanted to like severely slash prices on the Xbox and like grab market share like this, they could probably do it, right?
Yeah.
That's just not their game. But Epic is definitely throwing around the like, we have more money than God and we're gonna take down Steam as their strategy. But Apple anyway claims that they're not going to be profitable until 2027, whereas Epic is like, no, 2023. But still, what an incredible amount of money.
Yeah. I think they're taking a big risk, it feels like. I feel like everything could come crashing down on their heads. But hey, they got the Kingdom Hearts series at full price now, so
they were on sale for 20% off when they came out.
Oh, good.
So, yeah.
I was not among the extremely scandalized at the PC prices, but then again, I wasn't going to be buying them, so.
You know, everybody always gets scandalized when something is a remaster. I mean, I know this wasn't even a remaster, right? But people always get scandalized when remasters come out for full price. People love to be scandalized when Kingdom Hearts re-releases their games and charges some money for them. So,
yeah,
you know.
I was just like, it probably took a lot of work to bring something to PC. Maybe not Kingdom Hearts 3 so much, because it's on Unreal.
They probably had to make Kingdom Hearts 1 from scratch for the 5th time.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if they did. But I was like, you know, it's not like each one is $60. You get like, you know, 3 for $60. I don't know. It wasn't. I was like, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's their way of saying, look, if you haven't bought a PlayStation already, like, this is your own fault.
Yeah. You're right, it's really just subtle. Like, they really had an agreement with Sony that was like, if you bring it to PC, you must subtly market the PlayStation, where the all-in-one collection is like $20.
Yeah. Anyway, the future of console exclusivity is definitely in these timed spaces and, I mean, potentially in this Epic model of just throwing money around, basically. But the true exclusive, listeners, I think is dead.
I mean, first party. There's still first party things that will be first party.
Even those, though, are not gonna... I just don't think that holds up forever.
I cannot picture, like, The Last of Us going on to another system. Sony will cling to that with their undead hands, you know?
I guess so. I don't know. Again, all this comes back to I don't really understand why they're starting to let some games onto PC. What's the economic... I mean, if they're just going to keep remaking The Last of Us forever, then yeah, absolutely. You're right. If they're just going to remake it for every system, agreed. But I would have thought by now, like, for the first game, it's like, hasn't everybody who's going to play the first game bought it? Slash, like, isn't it available for, like, $10? Isn't it already on PS Now, on the like, free games for PS5? Like, surely there's only money to be made by putting that on another system, unless you're going to do a remake again.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's the same question of, like, I wonder what the economics are behind deciding that, like, just, it's a standard of usually it's timed exclusivity for a year. Is that just because it's a nice round number, or is it because usually you've made 85% of the money you're going to make on a game at that point? Who knows? But I would assume that the reason that Horizon Zero Dawn went is because they were like, well, we're selling this for like $5 at this point on PlayStation, so like surely we can make more money putting it on PC at this point.
Yeah.
And using it as an advertisement, right? Like Horizon, what is it? Forbidden West, True West, Westy West.
The Westy West, yeah.
Yeah, Horizon Westy West is going to be a... Is it just PS5? No, it's coming to PS4 too, right? But it's a PlayStation exclusive.
Yeah.
So you might as well get people hooked on the game on PC and then bully them into attempting and failing to buying a PS5.
Oh, man. The real platform exclusivity is the people who have bots ordering them PlayStation 5s. I tried to get a GameStop bundle, which, by the way, GameStop really sucks that you only put up bundles and not just the console, but whatever.
Money, to the moon.
It's just, like, it's absurd. Like, I don't know. I'll never get one. That's what I've come to the conclusion. As soon as I started wanting one, the universe was like, no.
Anyway, to close this out, thinking about this episode really made me realize that I have no principled reason for being a PlayStation household.
There shouldn't be one, to be fair. You know? Like, you shouldn't have, like... Well, unless, like, a company is, like, trotting their child laborers out on stage. Like...
I shouldn't be laughing at that. This is not funny.
I know. It's laughing out of pain. You know, maybe then it's like you have some principled reason for not buying that console, but like there shouldn't be one just in terms of like Xbox players are lame.
I didn't even mean like that far. I didn't mean like moral principles. I just mean like, why do I have a PS4? I mean, I guess I have a PS4 because Kingdom Hearts is on it, right? So like maybe it is the exclusives that got me. But
that's true.
In looking towards PS5 and Xbox Series X, like I definitely have a bias towards the PS5, but that's really just because I have always had a PlayStation.
Yeah.
Not particularly for any true
the adaptive triggers sound cool. That is my one real reason for favoring a PlayStation 5. I want to feel the bowstring. You know?
Yeah. It's crazy that it turns into a bowstring. It's pretty wild.
I know, it's just a marvel of technology.
Anyway, I can tell you though why Emma has a PS4. The thing that really made it stand out for you.
Why?
The Blu-ray player.
I do use it to play discs. What can I say?
Listeners, that was a true driving factor for PS3 sales for some people, the Blu-ray. But for Emma, it's never stopped.
It plays DVDs, too.
Well, on that sales pitch note, Listeners, do you have a very favorite exclusive game that you've ever played, or did an exclusive game drive you to buy a specific console? Are there games that you're frustrated you haven't been able to play? Do you have strong feelings about, should we be calling these games something different other than the obviously incorrect word exclusive? And do you have pitches for what that thing should be?
Wait. I have just the weirdest exclusivity thing I've seen so far. Okay. So, World's End Club is the new game from the Danganronpa and Zero Escape creators. They're collaborating on it. And it's out on Apple Arcade now. Or, more specifically, the first half or so is out on Apple Arcade right now.
Oh, no.
And so it's exclusive to... The first half is exclusive to Apple Arcade for about, like, half a year. And then it's coming out on Switch at the end of May. And I'm not actually clear if the full version will also come to Apple Arcade or not. That's the weird exclusivity story to close us out. Just the wacky things you can do with platforms.
My exclusivity anecdote was about to be, man, I wish Duolingo was on computer. And then I Googled it, and I think you can do it on your computer. So,
I wish it was on PlayStation 4.
I do. I wish the Duo would yell at me while I was playing Yakuza. Like,
you know, I think they could make a great Duolingo Switch game.
You're right.
Like Cooking Mama.
Like Cooking Mama.
It mines for Bitcoin while you learn a language.
There it is, listeners. The crossover you didn't know you wanted this time. So folks, thanks for tuning in. This has been Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
If you liked the show, you should check us out on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. So hit us up there if you have thoughts from any of those questions, or you have weird exclusivity stories, or you want to berate me about other apps I didn't know you could also do on the computer or whatever. It's fine. You can also check out our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat for our main episodes, and also read the blog, featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend, where my boyfriend plays former PlayStation exclusive series and now Epic Games exclusive series Kingdom Hearts. And also Split Screen, where Emma and I are watching My Hero Academia, Funimation exclusive, and Coffee Prince. Rakuten Viki. It's not actually only on Viki. It's on a bunch of services, so never mind.
But it's not free.
It's not really free on Viki either, though. You can get as many free trials as you have credit cards and email addresses. How about that?
I meant when it was on Tubi, it was free.
I know. R.I.P. Anyway, finally, if you like the show, the most important thing you can do is subscribe. We have no exclusivity agreements, so you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, anywhere that you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. Next week, the old game is definitely Jak and Daxter.
Yes, you're right. It's not Ratchet and Clank. It's Jak and Daxter.
Every time I see Ratchet and Clank, I think to myself, the game is Jak and Daxter, which is why I remember. It's Hitman 3.
Yes,
it's Hitman
that's
3.
Right.
I knew both.
You did it.
Because I was nervous. I was like, Hitman 3 is going to be expensive. I wonder what Jak and Daxter costs. Haven't found out yet.
You could probably also get Hitman 2 if you wanted, and you would get the experience.
It's not the same Hitman.
It is the same Hitman.
Is it? I don't know.
It's Agent 47.
But is it like a code name like James? Okay, anyway, we'll save this for next week. Emma, do you want to sign us off this time?
I hope that your life is exclusive. I don't know.